This week, a look at the forthcoming graphic novel from Derf, Kent State. It's the true story of the events leading up to the tragic shootings of 13 student protesters and bystanders at Kent State University 50 years ago, the questions that remain unanswered, and how no one in power ever took the blame. Kumar and I review the book and ask questions about it, and then I talk to Derf himself for the answers. Coming up after this. One of our favorite manga is Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist. It's about two brothers who have dabbled in magic that they shouldn't have. They've paid the price and are looking for a way to undo the damage. It's a story with magic and political intrigue set in a vaguely steampunky world. Patrick, a maker and scholar of comics who you've heard on Deconstructing Comics, joins me in this podcast that can be available with your support via Patreon. If you want to hear our analysis of Fullmetal Alchemist in our podcast called The Law of Equivalent Exchange, pledge today at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. How you doing?
I'm good. Despite being a little bit locked up. I mean, Melbourne's kind of a hot spot right now and has been for a few weeks. But, yeah, otherwise it's business as usual for me, really.
Okay. Yeah, as we're recording this, I'm on summer vacation. By the time this comes out, I'll be back in school as on the teacher side of the desk. At my high school. So, yeah, just getting a lot of episodes done while I don't have school. And this time we're talking about Derf's upcoming book, Kent State, which will be out on September 8th. For anybody who's not aware of it, now I don't know, so May 4th was the 50th anniversary of this, and I don't know how much coverage it got with all of the COVID stuff going on. I don't recall seeing or hearing much of anything about it, but of course I don't watch American TV.
Well, he's you mean the book itself?
Well, I mean the shootings.
Oh, coverage of the shootings.
Yeah, I mean usually, 50th anniversary you would expect there would be some reports, but with the pandemic that might have put a damper on that.
Yeah, but he's had to cancel all his book promotion stuff too. Mm-hmm. But the book, it couldn't be more timely. Every line of it.
Yeah, it kept reminding me of things happening this year.
Yeah, this minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've got some of that in my notes. We'll get to that. In case anybody who's listening isn't aware of the Kent State shootings, I was not quite 5 years old at the time. I think you were not around yet.
No.
But in the context of protests against the Vietnam War at Kent State University in Ohio during a protest, the National Guard had been called out for strange reasons, and for some reason that still isn't completely known, they started shooting, some of them directly into a crowd of students, hitting 13 of them, four of whom died. And Neil Young did a song about it, and it was a big thing. I didn't know that much. I'm pretty sure I had no idea what was going on at the time. I mean, as a little kid, I did kind of watch the news sometimes, but I don't remember knowing anything about this until maybe 10 years later when there was an anniversary.
I didn't know anything. Well, I knew maybe just from headlines, maybe even just from the past year or two. I can't remember. I knew that 4 people had been killed. Mm-hmm. At Kent State, student protesters. That's all I knew about it.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that there were 9 others who were injured.
No, I didn't. And that was, I mean, one of the amazing things about the book is the sense of dread. Now, I might end up swearing a lot in this episode because a lot of it really made me angry. But as soon as, from the first opening pages, as soon as he names a student, like he says, this is Sandy Shore, she's 19 years old, you're like, oh no. And then, like, here's the next student. This is Jeff Miller, age 20. He's a drummer, and you're like, oh no. And your heart sinks with every
there's this feeling of dread all the way through it.
You don't even, it's because he gives you, if there are a lot of players in this, there's a lot of moving parts, and he's done a really amazing job, an excellent job of identifying where everyone was at all times and their motivations of everyone. And he really, sometimes you get a minute by minute breakdown, like it's 3:56 and then this happens, or, so as soon as he gives you a caption where he names someone, that's really important, and he's been very smart about the placement of those. And you really, especially those first 20 pages when you meet all those kids, you're really filled with dread. But then you get to the end, and to jump to the end, spoiler, basically I think they've shot there was something like 72 shots fired in 13 seconds or something like that. It was definitely 13 seconds.
60 some, I think.
60 some, like 67 in 13 seconds. But those 13 seconds are done over like 7 or 8 pages, and it's just carnage. And it's not just the 4, because you're expecting these 4 to go down, but it's not just those. It's the full 13. All the others were injured, and he gives each of them a panel, and you see the bullets flying in. And I mean, we talked a long time ago when we talked about frontline combat. I talked about how when John Severin drew somebody getting shot, it was like, what an awesome drawing of a guy getting shot. Like, there's no way, there's no horror in it. It's almost like the awesomeness of it. But because Derf's got there's that kind of punk vibe about it, it's really horrific seeing these people's bodies get blown apart and bullets like entering the back of someone's head and then leaving their cheek, and he describes it with the caption as well, and it's so full on at the end of it.
Well, and now these kids. They're not just, some names and photos in the newspaper. You feel like you followed them from May 1st to May 4th through this book.
100%.
And I read through the book twice, and I darn near cried both times I read the shooting scene. Yeah, me too. And he said it's fictional. He says it's fictional, but there's so many facts in there. I really wonder how much of it he fictionalized, because there are certain things like Sandy literally brings home a stray pregnant dog, and then it's also her parents' anniversary, and I'm like, wait a second, are these 2 things true? Because I thought there's verification. They're
right.
in the end notes.
Right,
pages and pages of end notes.
Right. But I was like, okay, so because if he had fictionalized those things, that would have been a really cheap ploy. Like she brings home this stray pregnant dog, and that kind of, it's her parents' anniversary. It's almost like the cop, it's his last day before he retires, and he has that big adventure, that kind of cheeseball kind of thing. I didn't read through all the notes. I'm super glad, and I kind of knew that he wouldn't do anything that ridiculous as to fictionalize that sort of thing. But I mean, those are some of that kind of leads into another aspect of the book as a whole, is that every possible, I don't know if it's because he was economical. I mean, the book is 250 pages, but every detail in there has relevance to the ending. Like, in one sense, it's a powder keg. It's everything that could go wrong is wrong. Like every fact, like the gear that the National Guard were using, like the crappy face masks and the inability to see or hear through them properly, and the fact that it's the first warm day of spring. It's almost like, it's another thing that reminded me of the coronavirus thing, is like as soon as summer started in the Northern Hemisphere, people were like, well, I'm leaving the house. You know what I mean? So it's a bit like that. It's the first warm day of spring, so everybody's kind of out. Nixon announces the invasion of Cambodia. Even the fact that Jeff Miller was wearing this shirt that made him an easy target, like every single thing Derf mentions in there has some effect on the ending, either in terms of how badly the National Guard and the authorities screwed up, or how full of life those kids were, and how much Jeff loved living in Ohio versus Michigan, and all those little things, and the dog, and I think Allison was the one who thought the protests were stupid, and that they were too violent and they were going about things the wrong way, and all those details nothing's wasted. It all builds up into this huge ball of dread, and then it's all unleashed in the end, and it's so horrific, and it's nothing. There's no. I think the point I was trying to get to is there's no schmaltz in it, which is what I was kind of a bit worried about with the dog and stuff. And it's like, it's not. It's there. It all serves a purpose.
Yeah, although I felt, now maybe none of it was fictionalized, but I felt like as we got closer and closer to the central event of the book, there were a lot of people saying things that became ironic in the context of what happened. Like one of the guys who gets killed, Bill, is saying like he doesn't think anything's going to happen, or it's not going to amount to anything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, if it was a little much for me, but maybe it's all based on, because Derf did a lot of research. There's at Kent State there's a big repository of like recordings of interviews and stuff, and the families also put together a lot of stuff, but they didn't want to give it to anybody in Ohio for understandable reasons. So they put it at Yale University. So there's a lot of stuff there, and then Derf did his own interviews of some of the survivors and did other kinds of research. So yeah, it might be all of those ironic statements were actually spoken at the time. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a line where Jeff says very close in. So Jeff has never been to a protest, and he goes to this protest for the first time. Here's another one of those elements. It's like, I can't believe this is crazy. He goes to and the line he gives, and maybe the words were put in his mouth by Derf, is, "It's time for me to take a stand and be counted." And he is counted. He's counted as one of the four for all time. He's one of the four. That line was really brutally dark.
Well, I think the endnote said that that's the conversation as remembered in an interview by the guy he was talking with. So
yeah,
and that's Jeff was originally from Long Island, and this friend of his from Long Island had said he should transfer to Kent State, and in that scene, the guy is saying, we should get out of here. Why don't you come ride with us and we'll head back to Long Island? And Jeff says, no, I got to stand up and be counted. Yeah. And you can just imagine how the friend must have felt. I should have forced him to get in the car so that he wouldn't get killed.
Yeah. And Chris Butler his bass playing buddy didn't know he was dead until that night when he saw it on the news. Yeah, and one of the guys, Bill, was actually in the ROTC, so he was. And most of the kids were going from class to class, as Derf says. Most of them were shot in the back while diving for cover, and they weren't protesters. They were just moving from one building to another. It's insane. It's yeah. I've taught. When we talked about Dahmer and the intense emotional reaction I had to that, and I kept wanting to reach out into the book and shake people and say, somebody help him, somebody talk to him, help him, he's in hell, he's in a living hell, you can stop this. And I really felt that here too. Every page again, it's like, so these National Guard have already been up for days dealing with this strike, this Teamsters strike.
Yeah, they were dealing with a Teamsters
strike. They haven't had enough
strike. Yeah,
they haven't had enough sleep.
They had to sleep in a room with a bunch of cots and the lights on all night.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and the gear they're using is like super old World War II hand-me-downs. But some of the, like, why do they have such super powerful guns that can shoot through 4 people? These M1 rifles.
And accidentally got armor-piercing bullets. Like, they didn't even expect the guy saying, somehow I got armor-piercing bullets, and the other guy says, too late now.
Yeah, and it's and why, and Ohio itself had regulations about loading the guns, which other states did not have. It's like only Ohio. Like, so a lot of these, it's just a perfect storm of all this stuff happening, coming together, almost to the point where it's inevitable that these kids are going to be killed. But the whole time I was like, every single time one of these things happened, like, don't send in the National Guard. Why are you doing this? Don't do that. Don't do that. And I was just, I was so angry and frustrated, deliberately, by Derf. I mean, I think he wants you to feel that. But it's interesting too because some of the authorities, especially I think the sheriff and the mayor, are really paranoid, and it's a reflection of Nixon's paranoia. Like, they really sound like him, and they believe that these students.
They've got all kinds of paranoid, like, fantasy stuff.
Oh yeah, they believe
like they're
that
going
they've
to be
been
snipers
trained in Cuba. Yeah, there's snipers, there's guerrillas who've been trained in Cuba are going to be bust. They're all communists are going to be bussed in, and I'm like, I mean, these are, and it's another interesting thing is Derf he really is careful to draw them throwing pebbles. They're always throwing these little pebbles at the soldiers or little rocks that they can find. And there's no snipers, there's no training. It's at the end, it's literally 20 to 50 protesters, and it was so frustrating that these guys in gas masks and with these super powerful M1 rifles feel the need to shoot unarmed students in the back at random. It was fucking mental. I was so angry at it the whole time. And just why? Who cares if they're protesting the war? And that goes all the way up to Nixon. Who cares? They have no power. They're just students who are complaining about it, and they have no weapons. Why? And the National Guard, it's really interesting, too, again, with the protests that are going on right now, is because they put black tape over their name tags, supposedly so that the students won't be able to know who their names and follow them to their houses. Whatever. But then they've got the name tags, then they've got the masks, so you literally can't see their faces, and that's empowering for a person. If you're completely anonymous, even if you're not a soldier, you feel like you have some kind of immunity. You can go around and do whatever, and you're invulnerable to it. And there's even one stage where one of these guards says, "I know your face, but you don't know mine." He literally says that, and I think Allison says they look like monsters. And that's very much what we're seeing in the protests now, and especially with these mystery vans that were going around in Portland, dragging people off the streets with this black armor and no names, and it was very chilling.
Well, and another thing, another connection I saw was that, a few students do dumb things. Or in the case of this year, a few protesters in Portland or wherever do some vandalism. And then in the case of now, the whole Black Lives Matter movement gets tarred by conservatives as being vandals and terrorists. And, the students protesting the war, it was the same kind of situation. It was, a small group of people who were communists or were doing violent things, but the vast majority of them were peaceful protesters. And certainly at Kent on that day, there weren't, the radicals, they say in the book, the radicals had all left. They all got out of town because they were scared. And it's just the regular students who don't like the war. Well, and then by the time of the shooting, the issue is now the presence of the guard. They don't care. Nixon's invasion of Cambodia is secondary by that point. Like, get the guard the heck out of our campus. So, they could have just left and it would have diffused the whole thing. But, I feel like, although it's clear that Derf has an opinion about this and is outraged at the injustice and, nobody ever had to answer for what happened, he still shows you, like the students did do stupid things. Why burn down the ROTC building on May 2nd, I think it was. And what's her name? Allison says this solves
She's often
nothing.
the voice of that. Yeah, she's often the voice of that side of it. Yeah, and it's interesting too. There's a couple. Sorry, go ahead.
And you can see, as we've already kind of said, that the guard had really been worn down over those days. They were not at their best. And they were poorly led by paranoid people who didn't know much about leadership.
Right.
So, there are all these kind of factors that led to it happening, but, nobody's really quite sure, was there premeditation to the shooting? Did somebody mishear an order? Some of the guard thought that they heard not fire but form up, and it could have been a misheard order. Because
of the masks as well.
Yeah, and by the time that there were interviews going, they had all kind of settled on their story, and the students were charging us and we were firing in self-defense, which there is film of it, and that's shown to be false.
It's a patent lie. No, there's a huge, at the end there's a huge cover, so it's very interesting too that we've got every minute tracked out for 4 days. And then we get the shooting, and we get where every bullet enters. It's like JFK. This bullet went in here, came out here, etc. But then at the end, it's like it's all covered up. We don't know who pulled the gun first. We don't know this, that. We don't know if this motion that the major made, where he swung down his arm, was an indication to fire. There's lots of details that have been covered up, and then it goes to trial, and then the judge acquits the National Guard that were on trial, and then they go outside and pose in front of a huge picture of them shooting
autograph.
An autograph?
Yeah, 4 of them autographed this picture of them shooting at the students.
This is 2020 to me. Like I feel like it's all just the same. There's a bit in the epilogue where there's these construction workers a little while after had gone to another university and beat up a bunch of students. Just
in
for
New York
anger
a few days later.
Students. Yeah. And then Nixon invites him to the White House. That is like the very fine people.
Yeah, if you just
Nixon's
substitute Trump
there's
for
very
Nixon,
fine people
I would
on
still
both
believe
sides.
It.
Has it been 50 years? I feel like nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed.
Although
if
you look at it positively, if you feel like now is unprecedented, well, it's not really. This is not the worst it's ever been. Or it's not like it's never been anything like. Of course, we had also a civil war in the 1800s. So now is just one of a number of really bad conflict points in American history.
Yeah. In fact, somebody in there says, I think maybe it's one of Derf's captions. He says the country is a mess, the worst it's ever been. I can't remember if that was his words or one of the characters'
It was one of the characters.
Okay, but that was a really telling line. And there's an earlier line that nonviolent protest has gotten us nothing except a new war in Cambodia. One of the students says, well, what does the violent, quote unquote, I won't say it was a violent protest because they're just throwing pebbles, but it's like no protest gets them anything, even 50 years later. And I feel like now, like, I don't know what it's like in the States, but in Australia, here in our news cycle, we don't get any news about the protests anymore. And I have to go to CNN or something, and then I'll see there's still a headline somewhere about something going on. But those protests are still happening. But the way the news cycle works now, I don't hear anything about it. But the thing I was thinking earlier was, it's interesting too that Derf says the mayor's paranoia is, the word he uses is understandable, which is interesting because there had been actual, like, a terrorist level, this SDS faction, the Students for Democratic Society faction, called the Weathermen, who were actually going around bombing and doing stuff like this. So there was a reason
and there had been there had been snipers when like African Americans were protesting in Cleveland, and so the idea of snipers was kind of fresh in everybody's mind.
Yeah. But I mean, the way he lays all that out, and there had been all these protests before and all these things, so it was kind of all building up to this monumental moment in history. But when you see this, it's just so, I don't know how he did it, but it's just so obvious that the students are not a threat to these armed soldiers in any way, any stage in this book. It's just page after page, it's hammered home. Like it's just building up into becoming more and more ridiculous to, in a kind of a black humor way. It's just crazy.
I mean, the whole aspect of the authorities. I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. I mean, you just have to kind of halfway laugh at the ineptitude that just keeps happening.
And there's like six different law enforcement agencies on campus, blundering into one another, as Derf says. So there's like CIA, FBI, military intelligence,
the campus police.
Police, highway patrol. Why? What is going on? They're students. They don't have any weapons. What is happening? I was just bewildered, page after page.
You were talking about the shooting scene. I posted as kind of a teaser for this episode. I posted on the Deconstructing Comics Facebook group right around the anniversary this year, article from Rolling Stone where Jerry Casale, who would later play bass guitar in Devo, was one of the protesters. And he gave his recollection to Rolling Stone. And he talks about when the shooting was happening, he says it was like a movie. Time just seemed to stop. Everything was in slow motion. And, it was 13 seconds. It must have seemed like longer, you would think.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like longer when you're reading the book. So I felt like when I read what Jerry Casale said, I thought that's just how I felt reading the book. It seemed like time slowed down. And then when the shooting stops, he said it all snaps back, and you feel that in the book, too.
Yeah, it's genius level cartooning, the way he slows it down and breaks it down instant by instant. It was next level.
And I felt like
you're forced to live with it for all those pages. And and as you said, like both times.
It must have been hard to draw those pages and see, have to draw these kids getting shot. I don't think I could have done it.
Yeah, no, even the last page where it rains and there's just blood washing into the gutter, and it's such a symbolic. One day later, it's all washed away, and they literally, they swept it all under the rug, and 50 years later, we remember their names, but, barely. As we've pointed out, there wasn't even that much coverage on the 50th anniversary of this thing, and it's almost like the blood that Jeff spilled was for nothing. It's just gone into the sewer, and it's really a heartbreaking final moment.
Wow.
What about Terry? You want to talk about Terry Norman, this guy who? This is an interesting character because even in the end we don't know what part he played. So this kid who's 19, 20, he thought he was a hotshot. He got an FBI assignment somehow to take, quote unquote, surreptitiously take photos of the students, pretend to be a student and take photos, and he's terrible at it.
It's terrible at keeping his affiliation a secret. Everybody knows.
Yeah, no, he brags about it, and everybody knows. And he says, "Oh, I work for the yearbook," and the guy's like, "I work for the yearbook, and I don't know you." And then he's in like a diner, and he's like bragging about how he works for the FBI, and he thinks he's James Bond. And some of the authorities know this. They know that he thinks highly of himself. And then he ends up packing heat, like he carries a gun around, and he may have fired first at the final protest, and that caused the others to fire, but then they were not firing in his direction. And Derf is really good about showing us exactly where he is in relation to all the other soldiers when they are in this V formation retreating from the protest. And he's kind of not in a place that they would have, if he had fired, they wouldn't have shot. But anyway, it's like, he's a really interesting, strange character, but he's kind of symbolic of the failure of the authorities, of all those people who are secretly on campuses across the country, supposedly to wipe out these communist radicals. And it's hilarious to me that Nixon, again, I use the word hilarious, but really, I mean, it's horrific, that Nixon was convinced that all these protesters were getting orders directly from Moscow. So...
Well, Nixon was certainly a paranoid person himself. So
he was. This is a serious mental health issue level of paranoia. But just the fact that the inability to believe that a person on their own could be anti-war. You know, think about that. Nobody could ever imagine thinking nobody could be against war. They must be getting orders from Moscow.
Yeah, and Derf writes in that end part just before the end notes that there was a poll done the next week, and 59% of the respondents blamed the students for what happened, and only 11% blamed the guard.
I feel like I see those types of polls every day now in 2020 as well. What was that was another powder keg kind of element here, was that the town, Kent, was very conservative, but the students, the university was like a little core of progressives, let's say,
liberals, bohemians.
Sentiments. Yes, exactly. Liberals and bohemians, whereas the rest of the town was still very old-fashioned, and that's
working class, 50-ish people. Them. Yeah, there's a big clash in culture between the students and the townies.
Yeah.
Coming up, our questions for Derf about the event and the book, and Derf's answers. Support us on Patreon. You'll help cover expenses of making the show and move us toward unlocking the earliest episodes of Deconstructing Comics and a new podcast series about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. You'll also be supporting our To the Bat Poles podcast. Just go to patreon.com/deconcomics and make your monthly pledge. If you pledge at least $4 a month, you'll get access to all of our bonus podcasts, reviewing the first year of Amazing Spider-Man and all of the MCU and Spider-Man films, and a review of the Amazon Prime show The Boys. It's all at patreon.com/deconcomics. We thank you for your support.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
And yeah, you were talking about the day, actually, particularly the day of the shooting, as Derf does it. He draws aerial views and shows you where did the troops go and where did these people go, and you really kind of orients you to the campus. So it's not just okay, they're shooting and somewhere over there some people got hit. You see the whole layout of it.
Yeah, and the pacing and the tempo of all that kind of stuff is really good, because sometimes he'll give you really long info dumps about what a certain organization is or their background or something like that. But it's always followed by or preceded by pages of just like dialogue, or often it's just those kids hanging out and we're seeing what cool kids they are, and that kind of stuff. And then we'll get an information dump. So it's really, it draws you through very easily. Like, it's kind of an easy, quote, again, I hesitate to use the word easy read, but it's easy in the respect that it's the flow, it just pulls you right through it. You're drawn through it very easily, and everything about, even the sound effects, like the tromp 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 of the boots and the thop 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 of the helicopters, were very chilling, very frightening. And at this time, by that stage too, like the National Guard is. So they've ordered people to go into their homes, and then this one guy's like blaring music out of his house, and they literally kick down the door, go in there, smash the speaker, and drag the guy out into the street.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, and that was based on an eyewitness account, he says in the endnotes.
Yeah. I just can't believe... I really feel like the masks and the when they covered their name tags, it really emboldened them to just do whatever they want. I think it made them feel powerful, and it just added up to their lack of sleep and the poor equipment and the poor training. He says, he makes the point that none of them are trained in riot or crowd control. They're trained for combat. Yeah. And on day 2, they're going around stabbing people with bayonets. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
they're not.
I couldn't
These people are
believe that.
running away. People are running away. They're stabbing them in the back and in their calves because they're not even. They're unarmed people running away. Why would you chase them and stab them? It is mental. Every scene of these guards, it was. I think that was so frustrating.
Day 2 or day 3? I don't quite remember now.
Yeah.
I'm going to. I think I can probably set up to talk to Derf a little bit for this episode. I want to ask him a few questions about it. Do you have any questions for him?
Oh, geez, I did. But I have to go through my notes. Again, I took a lot of notes for this episode, but most of them are like, oh, I can't believe Ohio is ignoring the Pentagon safety guidelines. And they're claiming that martial law has been declared and that they're enforcing the Ohio Riot Act, which neither of these things exist. There has been no martial law declared. And, anyway.
Yeah, and at the time, the Ohio Riot Act didn't exist, yes.
Yeah, that's what, all my notes are like that. I'm just trying to figure out, God, there was something really specific. I'll have to go through my notes and find it for you.
Okay.
Oh, I know what it was. I know exactly what it was. So, on page 218, 219, it's the moment, it's a 2-page spread, 2-page splash, where the soldiers open fire. And it's a profile shot, and they fire from right to left. So the soldiers are on the right, and they're firing to the left of the page. So it's the opposite of the direction you're reading the comic.
Yeah. And
I wanted to know if he did that deliberately, because that's a thing which, we're in Joe Sacco territory here, or Jack Jackson. He's it's very different from Dahmer and Trashed in that respect. It's more reportage, even though he's there as a kid in the first few pages. But there's a moment like that in Safe Area Garage as well, where they're going through the woods and they're climbing. The characters are all facing right to left, and Sacco talked in an interview about how he did that deliberately because it creates a unconscious tension in the reader because they're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, the opposite way that you're reading.
Yes, and I just would like to know if that one moment was done, if he actually thought about it that way when he did that.
Okay. Something that kind of... Now, Derf always does this, but it stuck out for me in particular in this book. He always draws people's philtrums, the indentation between your nose and mouth. Yeah. And I think the reason I noticed it more in this book was that there were more female characters than in Trashed or Dahmer. And it looks really wrong on women. It looks like they got mustaches.
I didn't get that vibe. In fact, I think he did in his own way. He made all the kids really attractive, the males and the females. All those young dudes were really hip, cool people that were like good looking, I thought. In that Derf way. I didn't get that. Oh, I did think of another related to the layouts. I have another tiny question for him. So there's a full. We get a. I say it's a question, but he must have done it this way. When the National Guard rolls into campus, we get a full page splash, and it's frightening. So first you get a reaction shots of the students looking at it, like what the, like oh my god, and then you turn the page, and you get the splash of tanks, and huge masses of troops coming into campus, armed troops. It's crazy. And then maybe 50 pages later, we get the sit-in. So the students have decided to sit-in, and we get a full-page splash of all the students sitting in the road. And I'm wondering if that was a deliberate parallel.
Juxtaposition, parallel. Yeah, that's true. But, this book, I spent most of 2 days just kind of focused on this book and repeatedly going to Google to look up things. That's how I found the Jerry Casale thing, and I wanted to look at actual photos of the 4 who were killed.
I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I've seen those photos before. So it must have been a while ago that I've seen those, and they're already in my memory. I couldn't bear to look at them again.
And I found, I don't remember what site it was on. I think it was on a Kent State site page. Some photos of the protest, and you can see Jeff, and sure enough, he's wearing that shirt and that headband. Just as Derf
that's another thing. The headband. Supposedly, there were rumors going around that the leaders wore headbands, right? That was another thing. Yeah.
So, but it was something that was hard to get out of my mind for a while, because I felt like the shootings had just happened, and I was feeling really outraged about it.
Really, there's a moment where the guard pulls over. There's a woman walking down the street with her daughter, a kid, little kid, and the National Guard stop their Jeep and point the gun at them at the child. For what reason? And the thing is, we've seen a picture like that within the last 6 weeks or so. There was a picture of a guy pointing his gun at a baby that was sitting on her father's shoulders. And I'm like, again, of course you can't get that out of your mind, because it's so... Not just the protest, but because the virus has had certain effects that, like that thing about being the first day of spring, or the first warm day of spring, and everybody, swarming onto campus because of that. And, everybody packing those bars on the first night and coming out, and it's kind of all built up. And I feel like everything in this book was, and surely he's been working on this for 4-5 years. Some of these lines he's written, it's like he wrote them today. That line where it's a total military crackdown, it's Nixon's wet dream, was just substitute the T word in there for Nixon, and it was just shocking and upsetting, and I was so, even now just talking about it and thinking about it, and again, I've tried to emphasize, maybe I haven't emphasized enough, but Governor Rhodes has he's sent out the National Guard 40 times in 2 years, more than any other governor. Like every single fact, it's almost like it couldn't have happened anywhere else at any other time. It had to happen at Kent State on this date, at this moment in time. And that Ohio is only one of 2 states that orders its guardsmen to carry loaded guns in civil disturbances. This wasn't going to happen anywhere else. It could only happen here. And all that was so... It just constantly builds up, and it becomes this huge rock in your chest that just won't go away. And at the end, you get this horrible climax. And then you get an epilogue, which is 1 page of Nixon's flippancy and cold, lack of empathy. Then again, you can use the Trump word. You can say Trump instead of Nixon. The utter lack of empathy from Nixon about these 4 kids. He's glad they're dead because it was a lesson to other protesters.
Yeah, killing a few people will calm down the riot. So it sounds like a good idea. I guess it was captured on one of his tapes. So
yeah, captured. He recorded himself because he was a fucking psycho. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's really well done. You learn a lot about the whole situation, not just about Kent State, but the larger kind of clash between anti-war protesters / a few communist terrorists and the older generation in the 60s and 70s who thought these kids were going crazy, and we got to knock some sense into them. It's I don't know if I can say I enjoyed it because it's such kind of tough material to get through, but it's very well done.
It's like, say, Feria Garajda, which I think is another real top 10 book. And it's another, we haven't talked about the art very much except for the weird lips.
The philtrum. I had to look up a new word, philtrum.
Yeah. The layout, like we talked a little bit about the layouts, but I actually think the art's better than ever. I mean, everybody has a different face, much like with Joe Sacco's books, and that really helps you empathize with those people. Everybody's a unique individual, and he really has taken a lot of care to make sure everybody has a unique look. And also, again, there's so much detail in the backgrounds, and like, I remember there's one panel where they're walking through town towards the bars, and you see the graffiti that says "No More War" painted on a wall, and it's like he can't escape it, and he's really packed that into every aspect of it. I love that. He never cheats on the backgrounds; they're always really packed with lots of relevant detail that just helps hammer it home.
Black squirrels. There were black squirrels that were imported to the campus at some point, and you see black squirrels in various panels.
And I think somebody said, one of the girls says that she likes the black squirrels or something like that, or I don't remember, but
one thing I wish that he'd done a little differently on page 108. So it's at the end of the May 2nd chapter, after the ROTC building has been burned down, and he has a page with 4 panels, each one showing one of the kids who's going to be killed. But one of the panel with Bill, he's with his friend in the car, and they're talking, and I felt like it kind of lessened the impact a bit. It made that page a little more confusing. Because unless you're really keeping everything straight, I mean, I wasn't even quite sure which of the boys in that panel was going to be killed. I think it would have worked better if it had been a panel with just Bill, just like the other 3 panels were just, Jeff and Sandy and Allison.
Yeah, maybe. But, I mean, it's a book you do have to read twice, because I did, because it's, again, like, even though he's very clear about who everybody is and where they're standing at this very second, it's a lot to keep track of. And it's 250 pages. I mean, it's a pretty big comic. So, yeah, you do need to kind of read it twice, or at least I had to make sure I knew who everybody was the second time. 'Cause especially the National Guard, or all the higher-ups, the authorities, they're all generic white guys, in a sense, because they're all paranoid. They're all just there to shut up the students. They're almost indistinguishable from each other, almost interchangeable. And the second time I tried to pay more attention to their names and what their hair looked like and stuff like that to keep track, but in a sense, it almost didn't matter because they were all after the same thing. And there's a very interesting moment where they're all in the room together and they're all pointing the finger at each other, or at least Derf tells us in the captions that later, after the fact, they would all blame each other for and have contradictory reports about what was said in this meeting. So that's kind of revealing about how they were all, and they were all in the cover up together at the end. Nobody actually came out and said what actually happened. So, yeah. Anyway, so small things like there were, if there was a moment that's a little bit confusing, like who's this guy or whatever, I found on the second read through it was much clearer anyway.
Yeah, there were some things that I picked up the second time, like, reading the end notes helped too, to kind of put some things together. Like, so, the famous photo of the girl over Jeff's body that was in like every publication on Earth in 1970. Though that girl was not a student, she was a 14-year-old runaway, and who had slept on the couch in the house where Jeff lived, and you see that in here. But I didn't put it together when I was reading it the first time. So you see her like on May 2nd, maybe sleeping on their sofa.
Yeah,
she's like out, and they're Jeff and the other guy are talking about her, and the other guy mentions her name is Marianne, and then at the protest, I think Jeff runs into her, and like he says, "Weren't you sleeping on my sofa the other day?" And so,
that's right.
You're alerted to the fact that she's there, and then Derf reenacts the
so
photo.
Again, there's no wasted lines, no wasted panels. Everything is there for a purpose. So you don't see don't see her sleeping on the sofa, or that conversation about weren't you sleeping on my sofa. It has an end purpose, right? If I'd been paying more attention, again, yeah.
Yeah, Marianne Vecchio was her name.
Right. But all these kids, and again, all these kids are like 19, 20, and he takes all that time they're always talking about their dreams, what they're going to do next year. I'm going to move here, and I'm going to...
Yeah, and you're thinking,
no. Jesus, no. And I was so... It's just wrong in every... It's, very sad in every way.
Yeah. All right, now I am talking with the man himself, Derf. How you doing?
I'm doing well, all things considered.
Yeah. Hasn't been the best year for any of us.
Right.
So the review that Kumar and I recorded, which our listeners will have just heard, is probably the most emotional review we've ever given a book.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we kept talking over each other. We were both really exercised about it, and then there were these like long pauses where we were just kind of contemplating it, I think. So I think maybe your book had the desired effect, at least on us. But
that's good to hear.
So, of course, this past May was the 50th anniversary of the shootings.
Right.
Now, Kumar and I neither of us live in the U.S. Was there much in the way of, like, at least, like, retrospective reports on TV or something, or did it all get kind of drowned out by the pandemic and Trump?
It mostly got drowned out, yeah. I mean, they had a whole giant commemoration at the university planned that was covering 4 days, and it was going to be something. It was really going to be something, and it was all just wiped out.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot. There was a little coverage in the press, but I didn't notice a whole lot. That was just as the lockdown really hit. So that's all anyone was thinking about. And it's it made me really sad because the students of 1970 have been waiting 50 years to finally be acknowledged, really. But the university, kept them at arm's length for decades. And finally, they've started embracing this history. And this was going to be their big moment in the sun. And it was just wiped out.
Yeah.
And not to be depressing, but, these guys are all in their 70s, I mean, they're not, how many more chances are they going to have?
Right.
So,
yeah. I was
very
thinking that. Yeah, the kids who didn't make it to the end of the book would be 70 now.
Yep.
Well, besides the 50th anniversary, what inspired you to do a book about the shootings?
Well, it's just a story I've always carried with me since, from reading the beginning of the book, my connection to it, which is a very small connection. Mm-hmm. But it really left a powerful impact on me. When your hometown is invaded by the military, that it tends to leave a mark. Mm-hmm. And it's just a story I've always carried with me, and the curiosity that it sparked, the intellectual curiosity that it sparked in young me, profoundly impacted my life because, I went on to be write for my school papers and, junior high and high school. And I got a journalism scholarship to Ohio State where I became a political cartoonist and then took that into the prose. That was my first incarnation in comics. I can trace a straight line right back to Kent State because that's what sparked, that jump from kiddom to, well, maybe I'll pay more attention to the world around me now. And it was all because of that. So, and that's what great events in history do. They kind of fan out through society and affect people in different ways, even kids. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of ties into a question I was going to ask later, but I'll bring it up now because I had noticed, between Punk Rock and Trailer Parts, which I need yet to read, and My Friend Dahmer and Trashed, and now this book, it's amazing to me how much kind of world-shaking stuff you find that's been going on around you in Ohio during your lifetime that you can turn out a book about. So
no, it's pretty... I don't know what it is. I guess it's just, it's pure chance. But yeah.
But I wonder if you would have any advice for someone else who would like to write a documentary book or a comic, but might feel like there's nothing going on around them that's interesting enough to write about.
Well, they need to look harder because there's always interesting stuff going on. I mean, you just have to find it. It's stories are everywhere. It's how you tell them that counts.
Yeah. How do you zero in on your topics?
Well, I keep like a list of things that I'm thinking about, and I do a lot of reading and thinking, and it sometimes it takes a while. Kent State was on, a list of potential books for a long time, but I had other stories I wanted to get to first, and I don't regret that. And honestly, I didn't think that I had the drawing skills to tell this story until now, and it's still very much a question whether I have those skills today. But because it's a very difficult book to draw. I mean, it was really challenging, and I needed to have a couple books under my belt before I felt confident enough to tackle this one.
What did you find most challenging about it?
Well, you're drawing crowd scenes, military scenes, night crowd scenes, night military scenes. I mean, it was stuff I'd never really done before, and it really kicked my ass at times, definitely.
How long ago did you start this project?
It took 4 years. So the first 2 years were just research, interviews and research, and then which explains the copious footnotes on the back. I don't know if you had the review copy or the real book, but the real book has like 30 pages of footnotes.
Yeah, I read them all.
Yeah, did you?
Yes.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. I worked very hard on that. And then it took two solid years to draw, and I continued, to do research as I was drawing. You never know when you're going to land that elusive interview. I think like a week before I turned the book in, I landed an interview that I've been after for a while. So, but it was 4 solid years. Yeah, it was a beast.
So when I saw you in 2017, maybe you were in the middle of the research.
Well, let's see. Yeah, I must have been. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
I just started. Yeah, I just started. Yeah.
So at the start of the book, you write, this book is a dramatic recreation, but all of it is based on eyewitness accounts, detailed research, and investigation. So Kumar and I were kind of wondering, was there anything in the book that you couldn't quite piece together what happened and had to fudge it a little or kind of fill in the blanks yourself?
Well, let's see. There's a couple small scenes. I mean, the big one is, the climax. Why? Who gave that order to fire, and why? And that's the big unanswered question. We don't know because they're not talking. I think I handled it pretty well, as best I could, and that's the power of comics. You can create that dramatic moment and show that little bit of ambiguity, but still get what happened across. But that's the big final question, and we may never know. We may never have the answer to that. Yeah,
well, you've got that order to fire coming from off panel.
Exactly.
And we don't know who said it.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
In the acknowledgments, you mention Jason Proofer helping you find photos of pretty much everything you needed to draw of how the campus or the town looked in 1970. I'd like to hear more about that process.
Oh, Jason will be thrilled that you're talking about him. He's a librarian at Kent State who's he's a total archival photo nerd, and particularly concerning Kent State and Kent. And he just has an amazing archive of period photos, especially from 1970, which of course was a key year in the history of Kent State. It was tough. I mean, this is a period piece, but it's such a small window. You're talking 4 days in May 1970. That's it. And if you remember your own, college experiences, nothing changes faster than a college and a college town. They are constantly churning and building and knocking things down. So to just zero in on that and find the reference and figure out what was there and where things were, it was a real piece of detective work. It was kind of fun, actually, but also frustrating. And then tracking down the photo reference so I could recreate those things. It would have been easier if I had gone there, but I didn't go to Kent State. I went to Ohio State. So, I could sit down right now and draw Ohio State when I went there and probably get 90% of it right just from memory. But when you don't immerse yourself in a college like that, you don't have that kind of intimate knowledge. So that was the challenge of being an outsider.
I see. Well, what was something that maybe you thought, oh, there's no way Jason's going to have a photo of this, but he did?
Well, let's see. I was trying to figure out, let me see if I can think of one. There was a water tower on campus that I couldn't figure out if it was placed there or not. And it kind of was on a hill in the background, and I wanted it there, but I didn't know if it was there. I couldn't find any evidence it was there. So I pushed it to Jason, and I said, was it there in 1970? He goes, wait a minute. And 5 minutes later, he sent me back a photo. There's the guard, and there's the water tower. And it was just, I almost burst into tears, It was like, yes. So I didn't have to redraw like 4 pages, but it was that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. So with the guard in the picture, there's no doubt that it's in the right time frame.
Exactly.
How much of the stuff in your notes didn't make the book? You must have had too much material.
I had a lot of material. The focus of the book helped a lot because very early on when I sat down, like you always do when you start a book and think, okay, what's my book about? And very early on, I decided to tell this story entirely through the eyes and experiences of the four kids who were cut down. And then I later expanded that to add one more voice, which was that of the guardsman. So I had these 5 perspectives. And everything had to be limited to something that they saw or were experienced. So that eliminated a lot of the extraneous stuff. And there's a lot. And I didn't want to get too bogged down on backstory. I didn't want to go all the way back to 1962 or wherever and talk about the beginning of SDS and all that stuff. So I really wanted to keep that focus very narrow. So I tend to write pretty tight anyways, maybe too tight. So it wasn't really a problem of wandering. But of course, the book is still, 280 pages or whatever it is.
Well, was there something that you really wished you could have fit in the book, but you just couldn't find a way to get it in?
Yeah, there were a couple things, particularly at the end. There's a very dramatic moment when a prof stands up to the guard and averts a tragedy. And I don't really think I gave that enough space. But I was already past my page count. I mean, I just did not have an extra page to spare, and Abrams actually ate the extra pages. They said, "No, it's okay," but I just couldn't add to that scene, and I feel like I really kind of shortchanged it because he was a hero, and it's a great scene. I wish I could have expanded it. I think that's really the only one that really comes to mind. Yeah, that's about the only one. Maybe a little more about the black student group, which really kind of started the protest movement at Kent State. They kind of got shortchanged too. But they were not active during those 4 days because they all, immediately kind of sheltered in place when the soldiers moved onto campus.
Right. Well, you do have a scene where a couple of the black students are talking about that.
Right. And that's really a great perspective. I mean, for your listeners, the black students who were very active, a black student group called Black United Students, the moment the guard moved on campus, they said, "That's it, we're out." And the reason for that is those kids had all grown up in Akron and Cleveland, inner city Akron and Cleveland, where the guard had occupied their neighborhoods previously in the previous 2 or 3 years. And they knew what happened when the guard came in. They knew people got shot and bayoneted and gassed. White kids on campus had no experience with that. They didn't even think those guns were loaded. So it was this incredible subplot of white naivete that, white privilege that led to tragedy in some way. I think that's really fascinating.
Okay, so I didn't realize that the Ohio Guard had a record of doing this kind of thing.
More than any other state in the nation.
Wow.
Yeah. The governor was a staunch Nixon ally. He fancied himself a kind of yokel Nixon. he was a law and order strongman. So this was particularly true while he was governor in the 60s and 70s. Right. Okay. Well, the 60s, yeah. I mean, it ended in 1970. Yeah. The previous 8 years, first 2 terms. So Kumar noticed a couple of things and wanted me to ask if they were intentional. So, of course, you should say yes, because then you'll look like a genius. Right. Then I don't have to cover my ass. Thanks. So on pages 218 and 219, the spread where the guard is firing, they're firing from right to left. It's against the direction that we're reading. And why did you decide to do that? Well, that's, the famous photo of the guard opening fire was taken from that angle. I see. So I guess I didn't even think about it, honestly. Curiously, I had to flip it for the cover because there's this unwritten rule, which I only just found out about despite being a grizzled veteran, that the action has to go toward the opening of the cover. So they said, "No, you got to flip it." And I was like, "Oh, damn it." So I spent a couple days redrawing it in the other direction. So I would have been better off following Kumar's instinct and doing it that way. Yeah. Yeah, because it does create some tension, I think. Right. The other thing he was noticing, on page 92 on May 2nd, you have that full page where the tank and the trucks are coming in. And
he knows that there's kind of a juxtaposition between that and then the next night, the full page of the students doing the sit-in in the street. Mm-hmm. So were you consciously kind of juxtaposing those two? Or
Yeah, a little bit. It also is very similar to the scene on the Friday Night Riot with all the students marching down the street and chanting. So, it's kind of that oncoming climax, really, of that particular day. So, yeah, subconsciously, I probably just pulled that off. I was trying to give a sense of the scope of the scene, and how this, particularly with the guard rumbling up the street, what that was like for the students who were there and saw them coming. That's what they described to me. So, there's only so many angles you can draw, it's
right.
not.
But yeah, it's really
a lot of choice there.
Effective with the tank right there in front, and talk about overreaction.
The perspective was kind of a bitch. I had to redraw it a couple times, but I was happy with the way that came out.
But yeah, I think it really emphasizes the overreaction of the government. Let's send the military in because of a student protest.
Well, that was just one unit. There were 2 other units coming from other directions, just as large. So it was an overwhelming force. It's 1,200 guardsmen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yesterday when I was trying to come up with questions, and I wrote to Kumar to see if he had anything more, and he wrote this. Okay. I feel like we're stuck in the past and not much has changed in 50 years in terms of violent authoritarian response to peaceful protest and the authoritarian/media villainization of that protest. But I'd like to know how he feels about this, how you feel about it. Is it a pendulum? Was there a period where things were better, but it swung back again? Or has it always been this way? Is change an illusion? Is change achievable? Or will the Illuminati lizard people always make us only think we see change?
Yeah, I think we've circled back around to 1970, no question. I think it did get better for a while, at least, the rancor eased for a while, but it's back now. It's still not as bad as it was in 1970, as far as I can tell.
That was kind of my sense, from reading this book. It's not.
We're damn close. We're damn close.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, and this summer has been, slow torture. I woke up every day expecting to, open up the New York Times on my iPad and see that 50 people have been gunned down in Portland, but it hasn't happened yet. And knock on wood, it won't.
Yeah.
The curious legacy of Kent State is that law enforcement and the authorities in this country have spent half a century spending billions of dollars developing and deploying non-lethal crowd control apparatus. In 1970, all they had was the guard and rifle butts, bayonets, gas, and bullets. That was it. Tanks. Now you have body armor. You have, a variety of gases, sound cannons. Just all kinds of material that they can use, and that's specifically to control us, which is a comforting thought. But it's a curious legacy, and that is the lasting legacy. Everything else seems to me to be exactly the same.
By the way, it just occurs to me, so you showed that, I think it was, I can't remember now if it was May 2nd or May 3rd, that the guard were bayoneting people who were running away.
That was May 3rd, yeah.
And I think you said, I don't remember if it was in the book proper or in the end notes, but that a lot of the kids who were bayoneted were afraid to go to the hospital for fear they would get arrested or something. Do you have any idea? Like, how did they manage to recover from those injuries?
Well, I guess they weren't as serious as the ones that did have to go to the hospital. There's a girl I show who got bayoneted twice in the back. She did have to go to the hospital. I think maybe 5 had to have their wounds treated at a hospital. And the rest, they just made do on their own. I mean, they were either slashed, because you get slashed with a bayonet. I have one right here. I mean, this is a bad puppy.
Wow.
I mean, it is razor sharp. And if I had it on the end of, an M1, I could shove it right through the outside wall that I'm sitting next to. I mean, it is a fearsome weapon.
How long is that?
Looks like it's about 12 inches.
Okay. Wow.
And the gun, the gun goes there and it clips in. And it's very stiff, and you can get a lot of power behind it if you've got it at the end of a gun. But yeah, it's no joke. I mean, when they say, bayonets are non-lethal, no, they're not non-lethal. I mean, it's the weapon they used in Vietnam to kill people. I mean, it's a lethal weapon.
Yeah, knives are lethal, and that's just a kind of knife.
Right, exactly, a big knife. So, yeah.
Well, with the pandemic here, how are you going about promoting the book?
Well, that's a good question. I'm talking to people like you, and doing a lot of Skype and Zoom and Facebook Live and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a brave new world. I mean, I have no idea, how this book will launch. I mean, I think it was in really good shape approaching the original launch date in April, but they all on the toilet, and along with a 40-stop book tour. And it is what it is. I mean, every book coming out in 2020 is facing these challenges, and probably 2021.
Yeah,
could be worse. I mean, look at DC.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what's your next project, or can you talk about it?
Yeah, I haven't decided yet. I mean, it's pretty hard to be creative during all this. It's very a lot of sleepless nights. I mean, it's a horrible year. I got a couple ideas I've been reading up on and thinking about, and I'll probably zero in on one sometime this fall, I hope, and get started on the next book.
Okay.
Work until you die.
Okay, great. Well, hope the book does very well, and we'll hope to talk to you again for your next book, whenever that is.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Kent State by Derf Backderf is published by Abrams Comic Arts. Want to support this podcast? You can help us out by joining us on Patreon. Go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Patreon, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us, and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. A special Critiquing Comics is coming up this Saturday. I talk with artist Junpierre Shiozawa, an early Deconstructing Comics guest returning 13 years later, and TV writer and producer Valid Chandrakesaran, about their webcomic Genius Animals, and then Mulele and I critique the comic. Then next Wednesday on Deconstructing Comics, Jason McNamara joins me to review Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips' new original graphic novel, Pulp. And I'm also joined by writer and comics lawyer Gamal Hennessy to talk about creator contracts and the current state of the industry. By the way, Gamal has a Kickstarter project running now that will be finished by the time next week's episode comes out. So look it up now if you want to support it. It's called The Business of Independent Comic Book Publishing. Till next week, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.